Hello, everyone. Welcome into another edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, as always, Tommy Brzee. It is Friday, November 8th around here, and we have a great show for you today. We're going to start talking about the Billy Napier situation. He is staying put in Gainesville, Florida for at least one more year into 2025. We'll break down that situation as well as all the other hot seat situations around the country, try to give you guys a good update on where everyone sits right now. Then we'll get into all the players and coaches under the most pressure as we head into this week, and Billy Napier was just added to this list with the news that came out yesterday. Then we'll get into all the Week 11 games we hadn't had a chance to get to thus far. Definitely some games that have already happened, including an absolute logjam that is forming at the top of the MAC that is going to be really interesting to see how it unties. Then we'll get into my best bets for this upcoming weekend. Definitely a ton here, including a little bit of different matchups, I think, in Oxford, Mississippi, comparative to Baton Rouge, and we'll get into that in that segment. Then we'll get into a Week 11 injury and headline update. A ton of different things going on, including a situation over at LSU that is not great, and I'll leave it at that for the time being. But before we jump in, I do want to remind you all we get tons of questions and comments throughout the show, and the best way for you all to get your question on the screen, we can have a fun back and forth here, is to use that super chat. Click that $sign at the bottom of the chat on the Sports Network page. You can add any question, comment you'd like. It'll pop up on the screen, and we can have a fun back and forth here. Definitely want this to be as interactive as possible, and that is the best way to do it. Also, GSMCpodcast.net is still up and running, does the exact same thing, so either one of those you'd like to use and be this just a little bit more interactive, have your say in the show, absolutely would love that. But let's jump into the situation that's going on down there in Gainesville, Florida, because Billy Napier is going to stay the head coach of the Florida Gators at least through 2025. That was something that Scott Strickland let us know yesterday, and it's definitely something that has gotten some mixed reactions all around the college football world. So let's go ahead and jump into this, and during this we will get into a lot of different head coaches. We'll get into kind of just where at least I see everyone sitting. Obviously, a lot of this stuff changes very quickly, and some of these people might be in a little bit more danger or a little bit less danger than I'm thinking right now. But we'll start with that guy, Billy Napier, because this one is very, very interesting. It's a decision that I think a lot of us were expecting to go the other direction. I wasn't expecting a decision at all before the end of the season at the very least. I was very surprised that they made this decision with 4 games left in the year. I understand it to a certain degree. You know, your recruiting is not necessarily great. I believe they sit at 51st in the country right now in this upcoming class. They're not necessarily doing the things they want to do. Knowing who the head coach is going to help you with recruiting, regardless of who that head coach is. Because regardless of what you think of Billy Napier as a coach, regardless of what you think of how he does on game days, he has been able to recruit. A lot of the talented, really incredible guys on that team are young recruits, and that's actually a big reason. So he hasn't topped 6 wins in 3 years at Florida, and frankly, he's probably not going to get to 7 this year because you'd have to win 2 out of 3 out of Texas, Ole Miss, and LSU. Probably going to beat Florida State at the end of the year, but needs one of those at least to go bowling, needs 2 of them to get over 6 wins for the first time. But there are big reasons to keep him intact, and that's one of them. DJ Lagway is going to be your quarterback going forward. Billy Napier is the guy that he wants to play for. He has made that very, very clear. He made that clear again yesterday because he was very excited about this news. So it is something that you do have to think about this. Now, a lot of people counter that with thinking any coach that you get is going to be able to bring in a very talented quarterback, and you're right about that. So there is a battle back and forth, and I totally get that. I think the other part of this is you have a lot of money that is about to have to be spent. One way or the other, you are about to have to spend at least $20 million on revenue sharing on top of NIL for the team, on top of a lot of different things that are coming up over the next couple of years. Add to that a $26 million buyout. Things get a little bit sketchy over there at Florida. So the question is, do you take that money and then just refunnel it into the portal this offseason? Refunnel it into making 2025 the year for Florida Gators and Florida football team going forward. So it is kind of a battle back and forth, and I understand really both sides of the argument. I'd probably lean more towards going to get a new coach. I'll be totally honest. I think 3 years at Florida in the current landscape is more than enough time to figure out your footing and to at least get over 6 wins. All that being said, I still think Billy Napier is a really good coach. I still think he is capable of succeeding at Florida. I just think it's going to be a little bit longer than Florida fans are comfortable with, and they might be sitting here next year and they're 5-3. They're playing a little bit better football, but maybe the wins aren't coming the way that you want it to, and then you have to make another decision. And frankly, they'll probably decide to keep him then too. So it is kind of a battle back and forth, and I totally understand Florida fans that are not excited about this. But there are some parts of it that are just entirely out of people's control, including Scott Strickland is a big piece of this. And it's not necessarily that I'm making, any accusations or anything like that, but the reality was the scuttlebutt was around Gainesville that if Billy Napier were to be fired, Scott Strickland was probably not far after him. They probably were not going to let him hire the next football coach at Florida. So he's taking a shot, and I totally get that. He is taking a shot. He's saying 2025. If he succeeds, I'm probably staying. If he doesn't succeed, then I'm finding a new job this time next year, and that's the way it is. So I understand it from his perspective. The other part of this is Florida doesn't have a president right now. They don't have a guy that can facilitate all of this back and forth between the AD and all of the different people in the board of trustees and all of that craziness. That is not an easy thing to get done if you don't have that person, especially if you want to go out and get a Lane Kiffin. You want to go out and get a really, really elite coach. It's going to be hard to do that without all of the administrative pieces where you want them to. So as weird of a decision as this was, from the timing of it to just what Florida football is right now and what they probably should be going forward, it's a little bit of an interesting conversation. I'm a little bit on the fence of, is it a good decision, is it not? But at the end of the day, you have the money now. You have all of the reason, all of the capability, all of the resources to go out and attack this next year. You miss the mark, then everyone around there is probably getting fired, and the Florida rebuild is probably a little bit tougher than Florida fans want it to be. But at the end of the day, at that point. At least and at least you gave it your full shot in 2025, because it should be his best roster. It should be the schedule that gives him the best chance to win. It should be an opening where he can get to 8, 9 wins, possibly win a bowl game, and be a 10-win coach, and then they can move forward from there. There's always the flip side of that, obviously, but it's definitely something that I feel like this is not a terrible decision. I don't necessarily love it. I think I probably would have gone in the other direction. But if you look around the landscape, don't feel like you can get a top guy and you can sit there and say, I feel relatively good about the coach that we have right now, and I can take the $26 million that we have and put it towards a team that can be as talented as everyone else around us in 2025. I don't think it's that crazy. I do understand the people pushing back on that. I do understand all of the kind of counters to that, and you're probably right in a lot of different respects. But at the end of the day, I don't think it's a crazy decision from Florida. I could be saying in a year from now it was a crazy decision, but as of right now, I don't think it's all that crazy, and I think Billy Napier has the capability to be very successful there. It's just you got to press a lot of really good buttons over the next 9 months or so. So we'll see what happens, but getting into kind of the rest of the college football landscape. So Billy Napier has saved his job. One way or the other, they did a great job this season. And one thing I didn't bring up before, but is worth talking about, is the buy-in from the players has been very, very clear. From the start of the season to right now, they have not quit once. And there's something to be said about that. There's a lot of really young players that absolutely love this guy. They're putting a lot of NIL into the very young guys on this roster. So it's not all that crazy to me that he's sticking around. And if you see what this team plays like on a week-to-week basis, there's something there. I'm not necessarily saying they're going to come into 2025, win 10 games, go to the playoff, but I do think there's something there to where maybe if you attack it the right way in 2025, things can really fall into place. And then Dave Aranda, I do think, has saved his job. He's gotten 3 straight wins. Sawyer Robinson is really, really coming along at quarterback, and it was one of those things where early on in the season, it looked like the writing was on the wall. It looked like it was over for Dave Aranda, but he's been able to right the ship, and I think he's going to get at least one more in Waco. And frankly, I think he's a plenty talented coach, and I think they probably bounce back in 2025 in quite a big way, to be totally honest. And then we got the guys that the writing is on the wall, and I hate to say it about Sam Pittman because he's so much fun. He's always someone that I love seeing the press conferences and the clippings and all of that stuff from Sam Pittman. But at the end of the day, from that loss to Ole Miss to the rest of the schedule that he's facing down, doesn't look good by any means. Maybe if they beat Texas, things can get right and he can get one more year, but I think Arkansas fans have kind of lost patience here, and I think they're probably going to move on from Sam Pittman, and then this is probably the job to watch. I saw someone bring up Rhett Lashley a little bit ago. Not crazy at all. Definitely one to watch, that SMU coach that could be really interesting for this job. And then Ryan Walters. This one could change in November, but they got Ohio State, Penn State, Michigan State, and Indiana in November. I don't think it's going to change in November. I hate to say it. I think Ryan Walters is a very talented offensive coach, but at this very moment, it's going to be really hard to get back all of the things that he needs in this last month of the season. And then we got the 2025 as a prove-it year coaches, and some people might be left off this. We'll get to them here in a second, but Hugh Freeze. Hugh Freeze knows this. All of the fans know this. All the players know this. They know that 2025 is a make-or-break season for this administration and really for Auburn football for quite some time to come. You have a coach down there in Tuscaloosa that is going to get things up and running. If it's not this year, it'll be next year, and if you're not there to counter him, you're probably not going to be there to counter him for the next 5 years. So it is a huge year in Auburn, Alabama, and frankly, I think they have the ability to turn a corner. Like Florida, they're going to have to hit a lot of really nice buttons in the portal to do that. And then Lincoln Riley, no doubt about it. He understands this, and frankly, I think he's rebuilt his defensive staff really well. And he's admitted he was wrong, and he's righted that wrong. Next year, he's got to show a lot of progress. It's got to be at least 9-10 wins. They got to at least compete for the CFP and probably compete for the Big Ten in a number of different ways. So he's got a lot on his plate, and maybe this one changes before the end of the year, and maybe I'm thinking he's a little bit safer than he is. But as of right now, I think 2025 will be the year that all USC fans define him by for the rest of his time there. And then Gus Malzahn, I think, is kind of an under-the-radar one, but he's done some great things at UCF. He's done a great job bringing in some portal guys that have helped out, bringing in some recruits that they usually wouldn't get. Thing is, they needed to turn quite the corner in 2025 because everyone felt like they were going to turn a corner this year, and it just never quite happened. I feel like they have the guy in Dylan Rizek to do that. A lot of other stuff is going to have to come into place, and with R.J. Harvey likely going to the league, you're going to have to find a replacement there. So a lot of work to do with these three guys, but they're going to get at least one more year, at least in my mind. Lincoln Riley's one that I'm still a little bit worried about, but I'll say they're going to get one more year, and then we'll see what happens this time next year. And then your guess is as good as mine for a lot of these guys, to be totally honest. Mark Stoops is one where just a weird situation. He is one of the highest paid coaches in the sport, and getting rid of him would probably be really tough to do, especially right now with all of the things that are about to come on your pocketbooks. You're going to have to deal with a lot of different things before you even deal with his salary. So it might not be the ideal situation right now for Kentucky, but I don't necessarily think Mark Stoops is on the hot seat. I don't necessarily think he has to deliver in 2025. Fans are getting a little impatient, so we'll see what happens there. But at the end of the day, I don't think he's someone that's in immediate danger, I suppose. If 2025 goes all awry, then maybe we're having a conversation. But for right now, I think it's just too much stuff to get through for Kentucky to pull that off. And then Mike Norvell. They got to be better in 2025. I know that for a fact. They got to be a whole lot better, and they got to play a whole lot better football, and he's got to change a lot of his staff. But at the end of the day, he is at a point where a lot of the stuff that needs to be fixed around that program is not going to be fixed in 2025. You have to start recruiting the high school better. You have to start pushing more resources in that direction, and you're not going to be able to do that in just 1 year. So it's going to be a little bit of a rebuild. It's going to be a little bit of a bounce back. And next year, hopefully you get a little bit better with some portal guys. Then you can start recruiting and really start building this thing up. But I don't know what they need in 2025. I don't know if they need to win the ACC or anything crazy. They need to show very, very stark improvement. I think everyone understands that. And then maybe he gets back in 2026 and really can start rebuilding this thing. But as of right now, I think it's going to be a little bit longer than Florida State fans are okay with. And we'll see how long that lasts for Mike Norvell. And then we got Brent Venables. This is one where it would be a 2025 prove-it year type of guy, but at the end of the day, I think there's a little bit of understanding in the Oklahoma world, them going into the SEC, being a little bit underhanded, not necessarily playing great football, and it feels like there's a lot of stuff coming together for 2025 for that team, just one way or the other. It feels like a team that could kind of build things up, but if Texas were to finish this year with an SEC title, that changes in a hurry. Then 2025 is the year, period, end of story. He doesn't deliver then everything goes by the wayside, which is kind of the tough part of being the Oklahoma head coach or being the Texas head coach over the last little bit. You are always going to be compared to the other. So a lot of this can change pretty quickly for Billy Napier depending on what Texas does the rest of the way, but at the end of the day, he's definitely going to get 2025, and we'll see what type of improvement you absolutely need to get through that. And then Dabo Swinney's another one I thought putting on here. I just don't know. I don't even know what I would say at this point. I don't know what he needs to do. I don't know how long he'll be there. I don't know how safe he is right now, and I don't know a lot about that situation over there in Clemson, South Carolina right now. Maybe it'll become a little bit more clear as the season goes on, but right now I think it's a lot up in the air, and a lot of people that don't really have a real answer to that one. But a lot of different coaches that are staring down some different situations this upcoming offseason. Obviously, you hate whenever you have to talk about any coach losing his job by any means, but it is part of the industry and definitely something I wanted to make sure you guys had an idea of as we head into the home stretch. But let's take our first break here. When we come back, let's talk about all the players and the coaches under the most pressure as we head into this week, because there's quite a few of them, including those two huge games in the SEC. Those coaches in one and those quarterbacks in the other are going to have to face a ton of scrutiny, and we'll break it down right after this.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign.
I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown. Get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift. Oh.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about all of the hot seat coaches all around the country because Billy Napier has found his way off of that. He will be back for 2025, and definitely some mixed opinions around the college football world. I don't think it's the craziest idea in the world, but it definitely could feel that way in 1 year if things don't go the way that they want. But that offseason for Florida is going to be one that we'll be watching very, very closely. I can promise you that. But let's get into the pressure index because we have a number of coaches and players that are under quite a bit of pressure as we head down the stretch of the season, including a couple that could be in a very precarious situation when it comes to the segment that we just had in a couple of years if they're not able to deliver this weekend, which sounds a little bit crazy, a little bit hyperbolic. It's really not. And we'll start with that first coach. It is Brian Kelly. He is in a very, very weird spot for the SEC or for the LSU fans, excuse me. If they win tomorrow, they're on their way to the CFP. The entire fan base loves them. They feel like they're heading in the right direction. They lose tomorrow. They're 9-3 for the second straight season. They're feeling like they haven't necessarily made the progress that they wanted to, and they're wondering what happens going forward. Not to mention they've just lost to the team that they're way too accustomed to losing to. So you're kind of in a weird place right now if you're Brian Kelly. This is a very, very huge game. Now, if he loses, he's not getting fired. He's not getting fired at the end of the year. He will get 2025, and then we'll see what happens from there. But at the end of the day, this is one of those moments where we always talk about, Alabama, Auburn, Alabama, Georgia, all of these games that are big-time games in the SEC. For the last 15, 12, 10 years, however you want to define it, this has been the game. In a lot of years, this has been the game that you have been watching every single year. I mean, it's been a national title 1 year, so obviously. But in general, it has been a massive, massive game in the SEC. And although it's not the rivalry that Auburn-Alabama is, or maybe it's not as high of stakes in some respects as the Alabama-Georgia game is, it is huge every single year. And LSU's at the point, like a lot of teams around the SEC, like Georgia was earlier this year, like Auburn will be in a couple of weeks, where they're looking around saying, the mean man's not on the other sideline. The man that has been so rude to us, that has been the boogeyman for quite some time, is no longer on the sideline. Can we take this? Can we take over? Can we flip that page and become the team that beats Bama instead of the team that is just waiting to get beat by them? So it's going to be a really fun battle, and it's definitely one where if Brian Kelly wins it, I think he is a king to a lot of LSU fans. I think if he loses it, there are quite a few that are calling the radio shows on Monday, kind of like Tyler in Spartanburg was a couple of years ago. So we'll see what happens there, but I do think Brian Kelly is under a ton of pressure as we head into this weekend. And then you got Kalen DeBoer on the other sideline. He's in a not as precarious of a position in terms of his job security, I think at least, but he is in a weird spot with these fans as well because Alabama has not lost 3 games since 2010. That was coming off a national title, and Cam Newton happened. I think we all understand what happened in that 2010 game. Actually, I went to that Capital One Bowl. They played against Michigan State down in Orlando in 2010, where Alabama just went to work. I was cheering for Michigan State with my Michigan State friends, but at the end of the day, it was an incredible season for them, and that was 10-3. That was the season that they look back on and say, man, we left a lot of meat on the bone. Man, we missed the mark by a little bit. Man, that's a disappointing season. And they went 10-3. And the only reason they lost was Cam Newton orchestrated one of the craziest comebacks that I've seen in college football. So that's where they are. That's where these fan bases' heads are. That's where a lot of people's heads will be when they come into that game on Saturday. They leave with a loss. They have 3 losses before they even go into the last 3 games of their season. And people are asking a lot of questions, plain and simple. One way or the other, this is going to be a way that a lot of Alabama fans define Kalen DeBoer going forward. So he's not getting fired after this year. There's absolutely no way. Even Alabama won't do that. But I can promise you, if he goes into the next season coming off a 9-3 year or maybe even a 10-3 year with a bowl game win, he's going to have to come out firing. I can promise you that. And if he doesn't, things get a little bit more interesting. So as much as pressure as Brian Kelly has on him, Kalen DeBoer has plenty as well. I would say Brian Kelly probably a bigger game, quote-unquote, for him, but I don't know. Kalen DeBoer is not trailing him by very much. And then you got to talk about Jaxson Dart. This feels like a game where it just has to be him. We have to be walking out of this game saying that is the best football we've seen Jaxson Dart play. He totally took over that game. He was the reason they won. That type of thing needs to be said because the way you're looking at this Georgia defense is they're going to attack your O-line one way or the other. They do not respect your run game, nor probably should they going into this game. So your job as Jaxson Dart is make all of the plays, make off-schedule plays, make plays with your legs, do everything you possibly can to keep that ball moving downfield. And yeah, maybe it's a little bit unfair. Maybe it's a little bit too much to put on Jaxson Dart, but that's the reality of his situation. He is the starting quarterback at Ole Miss. They badly want to go to the CFP, and this is the team you got to get through to get there. And you got no run game as well. You are going to be the leading rusher in this game on the year for Ole Miss because Henry Parrish isn't playing. Matt Jones is likely to not play. A lot of guys are going to be missing in this one. So it's you and Rashad Amos. Can you figure out a way to find a little bit of a rush game in this? And can you essentially play Superman football? That's your job for Saturday, which sounds like a lot against this Georgia defense, but sometimes you're put in those situations and you just have to respond. Especially if Trey Harris doesn't go, then there's going to be a guy that if he can't put on a Superman cape, then they're probably leaving there with a loss and all the CFP hopes are gone. And then on the other sideline, we got the guy that is struggling quite a bit right about now because right now I think Carson Beck just needs he needs a win. He needs a game where it's no interceptions, you complete 70% of your passes, and they get the win. And I think it's one of those things where it doesn't have to be special. It could be the lamest offense you've ever seen in your life. It could be, dump off Charlie. It could be terrible football, and you could absolutely hate watching it. If he walks out of there with 70% completion, no turnovers, and a win, that is incredible football from Carson Beck. I don't care if he didn't throw a ball 5 yards in air. It does not matter to me because on the other side of the ball, you got a D-line that's going to get after you. You have a D-line that's going to be very, very aggressive in the pass rush, and you're only completing 35% of your passes, going 2 touchdowns, 6 interceptions when you are pressured. So got to get the ball out quickly, got to take what the defense gives you and not start forcing stuff because then the mistakes are going to come. And when they do, it can be catastrophic for Georgia this time around, not just a blip on the radar on the way to a win. So it's going to be a huge game for UGA and Carson Beck. I think UGA having one more loss, the microscope gets a little bit bigger, and they can't lose that game against Tennessee. They can't lose the rest of the way, and even then, maybe you're sitting on Selection Sunday biting your nails just a little bit to see if your team gets in. And then we got Curt Cignetti. This is a very interesting one because obviously he's not in that marquee game of the weekend. He is not the guy that everyone's pointing the finger to saying if he doesn't deliver this weekend, then he's totally out the door. But you are in a situation that you haven't been in really as a head coach for Curt Cignetti, but more than anything, Indiana as a program has not been there for quite some time. And beating Michigan is a sign that Indiana is turning a corner in the Big Ten. I understand this is not the normal Michigan team. This is not the team that they usually have been. it still very much does matter. It's still very much a turning point with this program because whether we like it or not, whether they are this year or not, Michigan has been at the top of the Big Ten for quite some time. Being able to beat them, move up to that next level, which is Ohio State, Oregon, Penn State, and then be able to stake your claim there is the goal for Indiana right now. And I think this is one of those moments where you beat Michigan, say they beat them by 14, and we're talking about it on Monday. You got to feel like this is a team that can walk in to Columbus and get a win. You have to feel like this is a team that is not going to be wavered by this scary opponent, this bigger opponent, this probably more talented opponent on the other sideline. They're going to take care of their business and they're going to move on their way. So this is a huge point where you could kind of stamp your ticket to the CFP. Obviously, that Ohio State loss could take many forms and could get a little bit sketchy for them. But as of right now, you win this one, I feel very good about where you can be in the CFP, and then we'll see where the chips fall the rest of the way. But huge amount of pressure on him just to keep the ship moving. That's kind of the ultimate goal right now in Indiana, and you're facing an opponent that's more than happy to knock you off course. And then we got Dabo Swinney. He's in a very, very interesting spot as he goes into this weekend because he's in a very, very tough spot really until he gets that ACC title back in his hands. That's the end-all, be-all of this program. If you are not winning ACC titles, if you are not going to the playoff, we are not happy with the way you're coaching. Plain and simple. And I understand it. He has built this program into be one of the best in the country, and they shouldn't accept anything less than competing in the ACC every year. And to be fair, they are competing in the ACC this year. It's not to take anything away from that, but even if you went out the rest of the way, you're going 10-2, you're missing out on the ACC title game, and you're wondering what happens here. Does he use the portal? Does he go after guys, or does he sit on his hands again and hope that his team is better than it was this year, next year? I don't really know what his approach is going to be. That's another reason why he's on the I don't know hot seat. I have no earthly idea how hot his seat is. I have no earthly idea what his plans are after the season and how he can turn this around. But even this week, he's got to get the win. If they lose 2 in a row, to Virginia Tech, and then they're sitting there with 3 losses on the season, staring down a game at Pitt, this thing could get ugly in a hurry, and then maybe his hot seat is a little hotter than I'm thinking of right now. And then James Franklin, another coach that's not coaching in one of those marquee spots, and he's in a spot that is a little bit too familiar for him. Trying to bounce back from that Ohio State loss. Plenty of good in this team, and plenty of good kind of in that situation, because sometimes you get the best out of your team. When they're knocked down a little bit, you figure out how tough your team is, and they try to bounce back, and you'll see what happens. But it is one of those where they got to beat Washington this weekend, and if they don't, then James Franklin will shoot his way up in those hot seat rankings. I can promise you that, because fans are upset, no doubt about that. They don't want to be losing to Ohio State, but they understand that Ohio State is Ohio State, they are Penn State. To a certain extent, they get that idea. They don't get that for Washington. So you're going to have to make sure you win this game. If you lose this one and you're on the outside of the CFP looking in, I wouldn't be surprised if it wasn't James Franklin next year. But we'll see what happens there. Definitely something to watch. And then finally, Billy Napier. He is absolutely on this list. Probably wasn't the case yesterday. It is now. He has to deliver this weekend, and frankly, he doesn't need a win. I think everyone understands that going on the road to the number 5 team in the country is not a place where you're really going to be able to flex your muscles. All that being said, he's got to give these fans something. He's got to give these fans a reason to really galvanize around him this offseason, because a lot of the stuff that he wants to do is really dependent on how much the fan base is buying in, how much the fan base cares to put in the money that he's going to very much need this offseason. So he's going to have to show him something the last little bit. He probably doesn't have to beat Texas. He probably doesn't have to beat LSU or Ole Miss. What he does have to do is show them something in those games, and maybe he does have to win one of them. Who knows? But at the end of the day, he's lived in this for quite some time. This is not a new thing for him. He walked into the season feeling this way, but now that it's known that he is coming back for another year, it's just about proving everyone right. It's about proving Scott Strickland right. It's about proving some of the fans wrong and making them feel really good as you head into 2025. It's going to be a battle, but you got to get at least maybe one of those wins between Texas, Ole Miss, and LSU, and then you probably got a couple of fans on your side, and you can move forward from there. But it's going to be a battle back and forth. There is a lot of pressure to go around this upcoming weekend, and it's going to be one of those weekends where There's too many upsets on the board. Hey, we'll figure out what happens, but just feels like one of those weeks where it could get a little bit chaotic, but we'll break it down on Monday, obviously. But let's take our second break here. And when we come back, we got to get into all the games we just hadn't had a chance to get to throughout the week. We have an absolute logjam at the top of the MAC after the games this week, and then we got to get a couple from Saturday that are a little bit more under the radar, but we'll break them down right after this.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about all of the players and coaches under the most pressure as we head into this weekend, and before we jump into some of the games that we got going on, I got to clear out some of this. I do want to remind you all we get tons of questions and comments throughout the show, and best way for you all to get your question on the screen, use that super chat. At the bottom of the chat on the Sports Network page, you can add any question or comment you'd like. It'll pop up on the screen and we can have a fun back and forth here. Definitely want this to be interactive, so utilize that. And while we get into these games, you're more than welcome to ask some questions here because we got a little bit of a logjam at the top of the MAC. And frankly, if you don't like MACtion, I don't know what you're doing. It's incredible to watch, and I love that we got it back around this time of year. But we'll start with that Bowling Green Central Michigan game. Bowling Green gets a big-time win. They move to 4-1 in the MAC and place themselves at the top of the conference. There's about 5 teams at the top of the conference at 4-1. So it's going to be a really fun couple of weeks down the stretch of the season in the MAC. So definitely be tuning in on Tuesdays and Wednesdays. But the defense really led the way in this one. They've been really incredible pretty much all season. Have been one of the more stingy groups in the entire country. And when you have a guy like Terrion Stewart on the other side, you're going to have a lot of special things going on. He had 20 carries, 117 yards, 5.9 yards per carry, and then he had Harold Fannin, just one of the best tight ends, maybe the best tight end in the country, catching passes at 86 yards in this game. This offense is going to be plenty dangerous, especially if the defense is going to play to this level. And then the rest of the way, Boston College has a massive one against Western Michigan next, which is another team that is sitting at 4-1, and we'll get to them here in a second. And then we have another one, a couple others throughout the remainder of the season for Bowling Green before they get possibly into that MAC title game. Again, a lot of stuff that will have to be figured out, but if they lose against Western Michigan, then they're in a really, really tough spot because of tiebreakers to get back into that race. Then you got Miami of Ohio, Ball State. This is a really, really interesting game and one where Miami of Ohio badly needed the win and they were able to get it. And this offense is as deadly as any in the conference. You have Brett Gabbert threw 3 touchdowns in this game. Didn't complete a ton of passes, but was very successful getting the ball downfield. Keon Mosey, a really talented running back that you might be seeing in the portal here pretty soon, but hate to say it, but that's probably the case. Got over 100 yards rushing in this game. Really talented kid. And then you got Reggie Virgila. You have Javon Tracy. Really, really talented guys on the outside that really make this offense just really tough to stop. And then the pass defense is going to need a little bit of work. Justin Bowick had 171 yards in this game. Got to make sure you keep that under control, especially with a couple of big games, including Bowling Green coming up. If you allow Harold Fannin to get going like that, you're going to have a really long afternoon. But it's going to be incredible to watch all of this unfold the rest of the way. They get Kent State next, so probably a win, let's be totally honest. And then Northern Illinois and Bowling Green to finish out the season. And it'll be really fun to watch those 2 games unfold and could have everything to do with who ends up in that MAC title game. Then you got Northern Illinois. They added to a little bit of the craziness up top because Western Michigan was the only undefeated team in the conference. Now they're right back down to 4-1 with everyone else. So it's going to be a little bit crazy down the stretch, but is a very, very good game from this Northern Illinois offense, and particularly Terry Johnson Jr., the freshman running back, another guy that probably is going to get a couple of calls in the portal around this time. I hate to say it every time, but probably the reality every time. But he went for 23 carries, 141 yards, 2 scores in this game. Ethan Hampton was great at quarterback, 2 passing touchdowns, only 3 incompletions on the day. So really, really efficient game from Northern Illinois, and took down the only team that was sitting atop that conference right now. For Western Michigan, still plenty ahead. They're playing really, really good football, and Jaden Nixon, who actually was I believe a teammate in high school of Ashton Genty, so terrifying duo. I don't know how anyone stopped them, but he had 95 yards, 2 touchdowns in this game. Jalen Buckley had 80. That's a really, really good duo of running backs, and definitely could carry them to a MAC title possibly. But at Bowling Green next weekend, Central Michigan, Eastern Michigan to finish it out. So if they beat Bowling Green, they're probably in the MAC title. It's going to be really, really hard for either of those last 2 teams to beat Western Michigan. Now, as we know, the MAC's a little bit crazy, but at the end of the day, I think they get that win over Bowling Green next week. They're firmly on their way to a MAC title game. And then we got to get into a little game in the Sun Belt. App State falls to Coastal Carolina, not Central Carolina. But the fun part about this game, the night started with Tim Beck chugging a beer on ESPN, and it ended with a very comfortable win for Coastal Carolina. There were a lot of people that clip has been going around. If you haven't seen it, go ahead and check it out. It's really, really fun and gives you an idea of why Tim Beck is a very, very liked guy around that area and around Conway, South Carolina. So it's going to be really, really fun to see what this team is kind of going forward. Obviously, this year, neither of these teams are really competing too much in the Sun Belt, although who knows what's going to come, really. I always say who knows, but this season has kind of gotten me a little bit wary of saying anything definitively right now. But the story of the night was Braden Bennett, 9 carries, 88 yards, 9.8 yards per carry, 3 touchdowns on the ground. He was the leading receiver as well with 33 yards on. They did not throw the ball very much, obviously, but very, very good night for him. Yet another guy that's probably putting a little bit on tape for the portal, but we'll see what happens there. Would love to see him stay in those colors, but definitely something, the reality of college football right now. And then on the other side, turnovers have been a big issue for Joey Aguilar really throughout the year. Well, he had 3 turnovers today, 2 interceptions, 1 fumble. Coastal Carolina gets a lot of confidence, and it feels like Tim Beck in that program, it's been a little bit slow going early on. Feels like they could be kind of turning a corner. Maybe 2025 is a year where they break through and maybe have their say in that CFP spot from the G5. So a lot going right for them, and definitely a huge win that puts you in a really good position down the stretch of the season just to finish strong. Not necessarily to get into the Sun Belt race, but at the very least finish really strong and feel good about where you are going into 2025. And then we got a really interesting game over there in the Big Ten down there in LA, which sounds weird still saying those two things together, but at the end of the day, Iowa heads down to LA to face off against UCLA, and this is a really interesting one because over the last 2 weeks, both these teams have probably been playing the best football they've played all year. Definitely UCLA, but I think Iowa as well. Brendan Sullivan has brought this team just a little bit more offensively than I think a lot of people were expecting. His legs have been very, very important to that, and they've had back-to-back 40-point performances. As crazy as that sounds, the Iowa offense has really turned a corner and cannot give enough respect to Tim Lester and this staff to really get this thing turned around after a year where a lot of things went wrong and there were a lot of questions behind the scenes. You were able to handle business, get everything back on track, and that's absolutely huge. For UCLA, you've won 2 straight. Ethan Garber's probably playing the best ball that he's played all year and really maybe in his career. The question is, can you stop Caleb Johnson? Can you slow down that guy? Can you keep that guy from really taking over this game? I'd be a little bit surprised. I'm going to pick the Hawkeyes here. I think it's going to be a fun battle back and forth, and I think UCLA is a tougher team than we're giving them credit for. They just happen to play some really tough teams to start their Big 10 schedule, but I do think this one's going to be a little bit too tough, and then UCLA hopefully can finish the season strong and then continue on their way into 2025. Another game down at the G5 level that I want to talk about is Navy South Florida. Not necessarily a game that you're going to be looking at and pointing to for the G5 CFP race, not even necessarily one that you could be pointing to in the American race. I just think it's a really fun game. I'll be totally honest with you guys. I think these two teams that are in very kind of different places right now. You know, you have Navy kind of coming off 2 losses, not playing all that well. You have South Florida caught their footing last week against FAU and had a very aggressive handshake between the head coaches there. But it's going to be a really, really fun one. I think Bryce Archie, coming off his best performance of the year for UCF against FAU, played really, really good football, and that's kind of all you needed to see from that kid. You needed that one little spark, and I think he could be rolling downhill now. And then you have Blake Horvath kind of heading in the wrong direction, has multiple interceptions, multiple turnovers against Rice and Notre Dame the last 2 weeks. Obviously, not quite the defense that he's going to be facing here, but definitely a group that could really be tough and cause some problems for him. So this one's going to live on the ground. I don't think that's any question. UCF loves to get that run game going. Same thing with Navy, and it'll be really interesting to see how this one goes back and forth. I think I'm going to go South Florida. I think Navy's really slipping right now, and I think it was just one of those things where they just kind of caught lightning in a bottle for a little bit, and I think the magic has worn off. I hate to say it, but I do think South Florida is going to get this win at home and kind of just continue to ruin the season for Navy. Then this game over in the ACC is one that I just think is going to be really fun more than anything else. Syracuse is looking for a bounce back got a bounce back, against Virginia Tech after a setback against Pitt. Very, very impressive win for them. And on the other side, Boston College has lost 3 straight games. They are coming off a bye, so got a little bit more healthy, a little bit more engaged, and now they got to really attack this game. And I love the quarterback battle here. Whenever you get 2 quarterbacks that are really cut from totally different cloths, it's always really fun. Kyle McCord, a little bit more of that stand-up pocket passer. Thomas Castellanos is going to extend plays. He's going to make plays with his legs, and it's always really fun to see which one of those kind of prevails. But this is going to be a really fun game. I think Boston College with Thomas Castellanos has done a great job of creating problems for teams. They've done a great job of keeping games close and making them a little gross, but at the end of the day, I think Syracuse is going to be a little bit too much. I think they hit a couple of deep balls, but I think it could be a little bit of a shootout. Definitely one to watch up there in Boston. And then UCF Arizona State. This might be one of the games that I'm most excited about this week. As crazy as that sounds, I think this one is going to be so much fun to watch. And you have 2 guys on either side at the running back position that are among the best in their conference. I know Anthony asked me a question a little bit ago, breaking down the best running backs in the conference. I said it was Taj Brooks in the Big 12. It's probably Cam Scatterboot, but you also could convince me of RJ Harvey. That's the thing. The running back group across the country right now is absolutely insane, but these 2 are really, really special. There's so much fun to be had here, and it is going to a little bit live on the ground, but UCF flipped to Dylan Rizek a couple of weeks ago, and he's been really, really good. He was 20 for 25, 294, 3 touchdowns through the air last week, and it opened up room for RJ Harvey to go for 184 and 3 scores. So very, very talented offense on the one side, and then Cam Scatterboot on the other side. An absolute monster. He's over 1,000 yards, actually sitting at 1,001 yards on this season, and with Sam Levitt taking care of the ball, this ASU team is going to be a really, really tough team to beat. I think they get this one done in an absolute battle, but it's going to be really, really fun, and frankly, I've gone back and forth quite a bit on this one. I think I put in a best bet for UCF and then rethought it about a million times, so it'll be interesting to watch that one unfold, and I think it's just one that maybe we see a little double overtime here. It's just a gut feeling, but let's just see what happens in this one. Cannot wait for that one to unfold in Tempe, Arizona. But let's get into the third break here, and then we got my best bets for this upcoming weekend. It's been a little bit of a couple rough weeks. We will get into a little bit of a groove here, hopefully, this upcoming weekend, but we'll break down my picks right after this.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about all of the games that we just hadn't had a chance to get to. Want to make sure you guys have a full look at the college football slate because no game doesn't matter. We can talk about how, some games are more important, some games have CFP implications, some don't. I don't much care. Football is football, and there's plenty of good football regardless of what you're playing for at the end of the year. But let's get into my best bets as we head into the Week 11 slate. There's quite a few that I like maybe a little bit too much on here, and you'll only understand that if you know what the betting world is about, but there's some on here I feel almost too confident about. But let's go ahead and jump into this, and the first game on here, a little bit more under the radar, but I love Minnesota -6 at Rutgers. I think this is one of those games where you have one team just heading perfectly in the right direction. Minnesota has won 4 straight. Max Brosmer has not turned the ball over in those games. They've been playing really, really well offensively, have been able to run the ball in some games, been more pass heavy in others. They've been a really, really complete team, and frankly, you take out that loss in the first week of the season to UNC, this is a 7-2 team and looking very, very good as they head forward to the end of the season. And then on the other side, you got a Rutgers team that has fallen like a stone. And a lot of the reason is the injuries that have come in all across that team. So they've lost 4 straight. And they're trying to find a way to just get that one big win on the season. This would be a great place to do it. But I think it's going to be a lot like the Maryland game for Max Brosmer. I think there's going to be a number of openings on the back end of this Rutgers defense. I think it's just going to be way too much offensively for Rutgers to keep up. So I think there could be some points back and forth, maybe a little bit of a fun kind of a clash of styles with Rutgers a little bit more run heavy, but at the end of the day, I think Minnesota gets this one done. I think 6 is being a little bit generous to a lot of the people out there, frankly. I'm going to go out on a limb and take Army. It sounds a little bit crazy, and it's one of those things where it started at 6.5, it's fallen all the way down to 4. Bryson Daly's probably not going in this game, and I don't care. I'll be totally honest with you. I know this sounds a little bit crazy, but North Texas, I bet that against them in the Tulane game. Now, they backdoor covered on me, but at the end of the day, I did bet against them in the Tulane game because of the run game that Tulane has. They give up 297 yards on the ground to Tulane. They're probably going to give up more than that on the ground to Army this upcoming weekend. I think Kanye Udoh is going to be an absolute problem, and I think while North Texas can score, they absolutely are going to have the ability to stick around with this Army team for quite some time. One stop from Army totally changes this game, because frankly, I don't think North Texas is going to be able to stop Army very consistently, and frankly, I also think that when you get into the second half of this game, there's no way North Texas is going to be able to stop them. The physicality of this Army team is just going to overwhelm North Texas, and at the end of the day, it could be a little bit ugly. It could take a long time to get there. I think Army at least wins this game by 1 touchdown and maybe even by more, with Kanye Udoh going over 200 yards rushing. Let's just put that out there just for fun. But Michigan, Indiana, I like the under 49.5 in this game. This is one of those games where it feels like everyone is immediately looking to take the over on Indiana, mainly team total, but at the end of the day, a lot of people love that over when you're playing an Indiana game, and it's proven to be the case in a lot of different respects. The thing is, this is one of those games that just strikes me as one that's going to get stuck in the mud for a quarter and a half. There's going to be a lot of punts. There's going to be a couple of mistakes. There's going to be just pretty monotonous football for the first 20-25 minutes of game time. And then I think things start to open up, particularly for Indiana, but I do think it opens up for Michigan just a little bit as well. I think the biggest thing here is Indiana is more than equipped to slow the run game for Michigan. And if Michigan is going to have that happen, relying on Davis Warren to score you 20, 25, 28 points, probably not going to happen all that well, especially against Indiana's defense. And then on the other side for Indiana, explosive offense, a really, really dangerous offense, and no doubt about that. I think the game plan and the approach from Michigan is going to be the real trouble. I think Indiana is going to have to be a little bit better at the quick passes, just kind of working their way downfield, taking the 5 yards, taking the 5 yards after that, and then continue moving forward. So it's going to be one of those that I just think gets caught in the mud for the first half of the game, possibly opens up in the second, but doesn't quite get to that 50 number that it needs to hit that over. Then we got Iowa State -3 against Kansas State. This is one of those spots where it feels like a lot of people are going Kansas direction. It feels like a lot of people are pushing towards, possibly this is a sleepy spot for Iowa State. Kansas has been playing some better football thus far, and I totally get all of that. That makes total sense, and it's definitely something that will play a part into this game. I think this line is a little bit of an overreaction one way or the other, or really both ways, if I'm being totally honest. I think Iowa State last week against Texas Tech did not play their best game. I also think it's one of those games that looked, at least to me, as a little bit more of a blip than what is to come. And then for Kansas, I feel kind of the same way. I don't necessarily think they're a team that is going to push a lot of these teams to the brink the same way they did Kansas State last week. So it is going to be one of those interesting games, and we'll see what happens. But the big thing for me is Kansas is one of the worst run defenses in the entire country. If Carson Hansen and Abu Sama can get rolling downhill, wrap it up. There's nothing that Kansas is going to be able to do to counter, and more than anything else, Jalen Daniels has been great of late. You get a couple of defenses that can force a couple of mistakes from him, this thing opens up in a hurry, and you get at least a 7-point win in this one. Then we got BYU, Utah under 40.5, and this line is very low, so it's making me a little bit nervous. But at the end of the day, this one's going to be a fight. It's going to be an absolute rock fight back and forth. It is going to be two teams that are really just scratching and clawing for any yard that they can get. But at the end of the day, I think BYU heading up to Salt Lake is going to be a tough battle. But on top of that, you're playing a defense that can kind of flip some of that turnover luck that BYU has been able to get this year. You know, maybe that defense can force a couple of turnovers from Jake Retzlaff in this offense, and then you're facing a little bit of a conundrum as you head down the stretch of this game. So it's going to be really interesting to watch this unfold. And on the for the Utah defense, they have not, the Utah offense has not topped 20 points since they played the Oklahoma State game all the way back in September 21st. They are not going to be able to score. This is probably the best defense they've faced since then, and it's going to be an absolute nightmare to deal with. So I don't think it's going to be one of those games where Utah's able to get really much of anything getting going. Frankly, would not be surprised if they left this game with 13 points. And then for BYU, I just think there's going to be a couple of mistakes in there. I don't think it's going to be necessarily a bad performance or anything, but I do think BYU gets the win. I just think it could be like 6-0 at halftime, and then we're trying to figure out how to get offense going in the second half. Another, the other side, another over that I like in this weekend is South Carolina Vanderbilt, and this is one that I went back and forth on. I thought about doing the under, I thought about doing the over, probably flipped back a number 3 times before I finally made this decision, but at the end of the day, I do think you're in a kind of an interesting spot with South Carolina because I think this offense has been a little bit underrated throughout the year. I guess the best way to put it. I think Lenora Sellers' injury, I think Rocket Sanders' injury, I think just playing a lot of the teams that they've played and having a couple of the calls that have gone the way that they have gone has kind of taken away from what has been a really, really impressive offensive year for this team. And if Lenora Sellers is turning the corner that it looked like he was last weekend, it's going to be really hard to stop this offense if you're Vanderbilt. And then on the other side, Vanderbilt doesn't have to do a ton in this game. South Carolina is a more aggressive defense. They have better guys on the front. The reality is the Vanderbilt offense is so good at misdirection. It's so good at keeping guys flat-footed that a lot of that stuff is neutralized, at least a little bit. A lot of that stuff is kept at bay a little bit better than maybe A&M was able to last week. So I think it's one of those games where South Carolina, I do think South Carolina wins. I think they probably do a good bit of the heavy lifting here, but at the end of the day, I think Vandy's one of those teams that they see you score and they immediately just say, we're going to go down and score. One way or the other, we're going to find a way to put 7 points on the board. So I think it trades just a little bit, but I like South Carolina to win, and I really like Lenora Sellers to have another big-time game. Then we got Georgia Ole Miss, and frankly, I use this picture because I'm shocked that I hadn't used it before. It is absolutely so cool, but just wanted to throw that out there. But I do like the under in this game. As cool as that catch is, I do like the defense to win those battles on Saturday because this is one where I just think it's one of those games you have an absolute stalemate at the line of scrimmage positions. You have a D-line in Georgia that is going to be aggressive, that is going to attack against an offensive line for Ole Miss that is good, is not necessarily great, is not necessarily elite. I think they're going to get after him in this one. And then on the other side, I like the UGA offense. I like the UGA O-line, and I think they're more than capable of getting push. This is an elite defensive line on the other side. If you're going to move Walter Nolan, you're going to have to do it pretty consistently, and no one's able to do that pretty consistently. So I really think the run games get pretty bogged down. The quarterbacks have to make all the plays in the world, and I think a couple of mistakes will come. I do think Carson Beck will make some mistakes. I think Ole Miss run game will just not be very good in this game. I'm expecting a little bit of a slow start from both parties, and then maybe it'll open up a little bit, but not to get to 55 points in this one. So I'll take the under there. Definitely one where I'm a little bit on the fence, but I think these defenses are going to come to play, and especially Georgia's is really going to get after Ole Miss. And then Alabama LSU, I'll flip back over to over. I do think they're going to get to 58.5 to get the over here, and I want points in Baton Rouge, and I think that's what we're going to get this weekend in Baton Rouge. There's going to be really, really fun to watch, and it's a game where it feels like neither defense is really equipped to handle what's on the other side, at least from the way that they like to play. You know, with Alabama, with Jalen Milroe, if he's running the ball, it's an absolute nightmare to deal with. LSU figured that out with Marcel Reed. Well, it's going to be a little bit tougher to corral number 4 than it was to corral Marcel Reed, just being totally honest. And then on the other side, Kane Womack, Alabama, the way they play defense is aggression. The way they play defense is man coverage on the back end, and then we're going to rush 5, 6 guys. You want to do that to Garrett Nussmeier, he is going to tear you to pieces. That's just who he is. He absolutely loves man coverage. He absolutely loves when teams come with pressure because he gets the ball out quickly, he puts it on target, and he lets his guys go to work. So there's a number of different ways that this game could go, but the reality is I think it's just one of those where the defensive game plans, the defensive approach for both teams play right into what these offenses want to do. So I think there's going to be a lot of points in. I think we could have a downright classic, frankly, in Baton Rouge this upcoming weekend. But let's take our last break here, and we'll actually continue talking about LSU on the other side because got a little bit of drama around Bryce Underwood, the number 1 quarterback in this upcoming class. You also have a little bit of drama around Baton Rouge in that LSU game, Alabama game. So we'll break it down all right after this, so stick with us. Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about some of the different best bets that I have as we head into this weekend. I think there's quite a few over and unders that I'm feeling maybe a little bit too confident about. I'll be totally honest with you, but we'll get into them. We'll hopefully hit a lot of them because last couple of weeks has not been overly kind to me on that segment. But let's get into a little bit of an injury headline update as we head into week 11, and we'll start with those headlines. And I wanted to get into a little bit of a recruiting one. Let's talk about Bryce Underwood here for a second, the number 1 quarterback in the 2025 class, a current LSU commit. There's a lot of smoke going on around Ann Arbor, Michigan right about now, and Wolverine fans feel really good about where they sit with this guy right about now because Steve Wiltfong, a couple other guys around the industry have put in crystal balls, have put in predictions. I don't know what the terminology is across the different websites, but at the end of the day, he has put in a prediction for Bryce Underwood to flip from LSU to Michigan. Would be massive. It would be a total turning point for this program, for this guy right here, Sharon Moore. Being able to get a guy like that on campus at the most important position that you have. Possibly they still go out and get a portal guy just to be a little bit of a bridge, give him a little bit of time to develop. But at the end of the day, this is your guy. If you get him, he is going to be your guy for the next 3 years. He is going to be the guy that possibly changes what your offense looks like going forward, and he could be the guy that gets that next quarterback in there, and that quarterback after that, and the one after that. So he's a very, very important player if you're talking about Michigan in this next cycle of Sharon Moore's Michigan, and what does that look like, and how are they going to move from here, and are they going to be a little bit more aggressive in the recruiting world? Seems like they are. It sounds like one of the NIL deals for him right now is around $5 million. Sounds like it could double up to $10 million throughout his time up there at Michigan, depending on what those numbers are. We'll see what happens with that. Obviously, not necessarily the biggest fan of talking about NIL money at this point because at the end of the day, we'll figure out what that number is. And to be totally honest, I don't much care what that number is. I'll be totally clear if I'm being totally honest there. But Steve Wiltfong has put in the prediction for him to flip. LSU's not going to taking this lying down. I can promise you that. Bryce Underwood will be in Baton Rouge this upcoming weekend, and those two guys right there, Joe Sloan and Brian Kelly, they'll be all over him. I can promise you that. They will be doing everything they possibly can to make sure that guy stays committed to the Tigers because they're in kind of an interesting position. I don't know if Garrett Nussmeier will be back next year. I don't know if he'll go to the NFL draft. I don't know what's going to happen there. I do know that they're going to need a guy right after him. And I do know that I like Ricky Collins. I think he's a really good player. I think Bryce Underwood's just a little bit different. So LSU's going to do everything they possibly can. I think whichever one gets them, one's getting the quarterback of the future for your team going forward, and then the other one, mainly Michigan in this respect, is kind of floundering and just trying to find that portal guy that makes everything fit for 1 year, and then maybe they'll try after another Bryce Underwood next year. But at the end of the day, it's going to be really interesting to watch all of this unfold, and whoever gets them, they're going to feel really, really good. They're going to be jumping for joy in one of those facilities here pretty soon. And then we got the NFL draft. It sounds like the NFL draft is going to push back the deadline for kids to enter their name into the draft until after the championship game for the teams that are playing in it, which makes total sense to me. Frankly, I think it's one of those things that probably shouldn't happen at all until the season's over, but that's where we are right now. I got no real problem with that, but I do think it's one of those things that it's a relatively minor change. It's not necessarily something you're going to think too much about or be too worried about or is going to change your life in really any way. What it is going to do is make sure that all of those coaches, all of those players, all of those guys are locked in on the task at hand. And I think that's probably the biggest thing that at least me have had a problem with the last little bit in this time of year is feels like these fans, these coaches, these players, their heads are just in a lot of different places around this time of year, whether it's the portal or the draft or the game that's going on in a couple of weeks or whatever it is. There's a lot of different things going on, and I think taking at least that one thing off their plate helps them focus just a little bit more, and that's enough for me. You know, that 1% forward, I'll absolutely take and I'll run with it. So it'll be interesting to watch this unfold. It would open on the 24th of January, would close on the 27th, 72 hours after you enter your name, normally how it works there. And then the other one will be January 6th. And it would close on January 9th. So it'll be interesting to see how that unfolds, and it'll be interesting to see, maybe some players play in the championship game. They're planning on going to the NFL. They lose in that game, and then they come back. Who knows what happens? I think there's going to be a lot of very interesting decisions to be made around the NFL draft, particularly this one, around this time in a couple of months. But at the end of the day, going to be really, really fun to watch all of this unfold, and I think it's just a change that just kind of makes sense. It doesn't necessarily need to be one that we notice all the time, doesn't necessarily need to be one that really hits you over the head, but it is one that I think is going to make that slight difference of these guys being that little bit more focused, that little bit more locked in, like Tez Johnson. He has a huge future ahead of him in the NFL, and his team could very well be playing in that game. So a lot of different things that all these guys probably just took a little bit of a sigh of relief, just knowing they don't have to worry about that stuff, knowing they don't have to get into all that stuff down the stretch of this year. But let's get into this one, why don't we? I'm sure a lot of you have seen this news throughout the last little bit on X and on all of the different social media apps, but a live tiger will be making his return to Death Valley for the rivalry class between LSU and Alabama this upcoming Saturday. It will not be Mike the Tiger. It will not be Mike 7th. It will be another Tiger. And Jeff Landry, the lieutenant governor of Louisiana, has set it up to bring a Tiger out of a out-of-state refugee. This is a bad idea. I'll be very, very, very clear about this. This is a very, very bad idea. It does not do anyone any good. All of the fans are telling you not to do it. The handlers of Mike the Tiger are telling you not to do it. The university is telling you not to do it. But he's going to do it because wouldn't it be cool to see a Tiger on the sideline? It is absolutely ridiculous. It is very, very dumb, and it's one of those things where if you're in Louisiana right now, you can get this guy's phone number. So do with that what you will. You can absolutely call him and tell him it's a very bad idea. Hopefully we can get this to not happen because this is just stupid. I'll be totally honest with you. I get it. It's really cool to see a Tiger on the sideline. You don't have to tell me that. I thought it was going to be awesome when I initially read into it, but no. This is just a bad idea, because at very, very best, what they're going to get is a ton of fans looking down at a steel cage and saying, there's a tiger somewhere in there. The worst you're going to get is that tiger feels very anxious, that tiger feels very scared, which is not something that is all that crazy because they're in the middle of 100,000 people. It starts to freak out and you have a big time problem. I'm not saying that's going to happen. I'm not saying you have to blame anyone if that were to happen. Just don't give yourself that opportunity. Please. I very rarely, do this where I just kind of break character and just speak directly to someone. Jeff Landry, please do not do this. This is a very, very bad idea. No one in the LSU fan base is on your side. None of the handlers for Mike the Tiger are on your side. No one is on your side on this. Do not do this. You can still fix this. You can still not do this. But I have a feeling that's going to go through. So, cool. You get to see a tiger on Saturday night. Congratulations to everyone that's going to be watching. We get to see a 2-second clip of a tiger, and it'll be through a ton of steel bars because they got to put them in a huge cage because it's a really bad idea. But at the end of the day, they're going to do what they're going to do. The game is the game, I guess. Give your fans a little bit cooler thing to look at, although your fans absolutely hate this idea. But I'll leave it at that. Really, really bad idea, really dangerous, really stupid, and if anyone that has any relation to Jeff Landry in this, do everything you can. Don't let this happen. I'll leave it at that for the time being. I'll leave him alone, but man, that's just dumb. But let's move on. Let's get into some injury updates as we head into this weekend. Got a little bit worked up yesterday as I was thinking about that, so just had to let that out real quickly. But Georgia Ole Miss, a lot of things going on around here. We'll start with Ole Miss because Lane Kiffin released a CVS receipt of injuries this week, and we all know why. I won't get into why, but we all know why. But the highlights here are Henry Parrish is not going to go. Trey Harris and Jordan Watkins are doubtful for this game. I tend to believe he's playing a couple of games, and they're probably going to play, but we'll see what happens there. 4 offensive linemen are either doubtful or questionable for this game. So it's going to be a beat-up Ole Miss team. Now, not all of those offensive linemen are starters, so something to keep in mind there, but the depth has taken a big-time hit, and we'll see what happens in this game. I don't know if he's totally telling the truth about all of these updates. I don't know if he's totally lying. I know for a fact that is going to be a very interesting thing to watch on Saturday. I can tell you that. I don't know who trots out there. Maybe some of those doubtful guys are more than fine. Maybe some of the questionable guys are not going to play and never were going to play. Who knows? But that's the game we're playing, I suppose. But for Georgia, pretty much nothing big to report here. Jordan Hall stays as probable for games. It probably won't go, or at least be the effect that you want him to. Smile Monding continues to be questionable. I don't think anything's going to change there, and I think both those guys probably won't be out there on Saturday. The one big update for the Georgia program is Colby Young, the man that was arrested probably about 2 months ago under charges of assault to an unborn child and then assault to a woman. He has been the woman that has charged him has dropped all of the charges. He released an affidavit saying that he never harmed her or her unborn child. He has been kind of absolved of a lot of the claims that were made against him, and now the question begins, is he back on the Georgia team this week? Is he back on the Georgia team next week? Is he ever back on the Georgia team? I think that's something that we'll be following pretty closely here, and wouldn't be surprised at all if he was just out for the rest of the season and ended up transferring, if I'm being totally honest, but we'll see what happens. Definitely a very talented kid, and I'm sure there are a lot of Georgia fans out there that would love to have him in the matchup on Saturday. But plenty of stuff to still happen here, but a little bit of an update that could get Georgia back one of their big-time receivers. And then you got Alabama LSU. This one is a little bit more short than the Ole Miss one by a lot of means, but Cole Adams, the very talented wide receiver that has kind of filled in spot work where they needed them, and then Keon Saab is going to be out for this game. Really, really tough hit to this back end with not having Keon Saab back there. Very, very good kind of center fielder type safety, and you're probably going to need one of those in this game. So it's going to be a little bit of a battle. Someone's going to have to step up, but definitely a tough loss there. And then for LSU, Garrett Dellinger is going to be out of this game. CJ Daniels and Whit Weeks are questionable. I expect both of them to go, if I'm being totally honest, especially with Weeks. I think you're going to have to drag him off that football field, but overall, I do think both those guys will play, and definitely huge addition. CJ Daniels has kind of been coming on, and I think he's going to be a guy that you're going to want on that field on Saturday. And then just some random news on here to finish it out. Jonte Cook, the very talented wide receiver for Texas, is leaving the program. He has officially, moved on. Sounds like it was a mutual parting of ways. Wasn't necessarily getting the playing time that he would have liked. Makes total sense. They went in and picked up a number of guys through the portal. Very talented kid. The kid can absolutely fly, has really, really good route running ability. Needs a little bit of work on the hands, has some drops issues throughout his career, but has been very, very talented. And one of those guys that whoever gets him, I've heard Ole Miss reach out, I've heard Georgia reach out, I've heard a number of teams reach out for this kid already, and it won't stop anytime soon. Very, very talented kid, and could be one of the top commodities at that position in the portal this upcoming year. So a lot of stuff going on around the world of college football. Frankly, that Jonte Cook story is probably going to be the same story around the country here coming pretty soon. I think we're going to get a windfall of a lot of those guys, and there's been talks. I know Cole Kublik has said this a number of times throughout his different hits around the college football world, where he said there's a world we're in a COVID type scenario where you're just trying to figure out if you have enough dudes to get out there on the field. So something to watch. We'll talk about it over the next couple of weeks, and we'll see how aggressive that actually is, and if that's a real worry. But as of right now, there's guys dropping off left and right, and wouldn't be all that crazy if we got to the last week of the season and someone is trying to put together a whole new roster. I won't pick out any team because I don't know anything in particular, but definitely something to watch out for the rest of the way, and a lot of stuff to watch out for this upcoming weekend because it's going to be a special one. Whether you want to watch those two big games and watch nothing else, or you want to watch all of them, there's going to be special stuff happening. I feel a lot of upsets this weekend. I feel a lot of big-time games. I feel a couple of crazy overtime games. So be on the lookout, be vigilant, get all the TVs rolling, and have a great weekend. But thank you once again for tuning in to the GSMC College Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. Your support means a lot to us, so please remember to subscribe to the show, leave a positive review. It does make a huge difference for us. Also, follow us on Facebook, X, TikTok, Instagram, all of the social pages for all the content and updates you could possibly need. We have great people doing great work across every sport you could want. So anything in the world of sports you need, come on over to GSMC and we have you totally covered. But thank you once again for listening. Enjoy some football this weekend, and we will talk about it on Monday.